good farmer's job is to get out of the way of nature. So if it's only been in a feedlot for 30 days, you can still call it grass-fed beef, even if it's been finished on grain. So it's very misleading and very hard for consumers. So you want to look for grass-fed and finished.
Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today I'm here in Sydney with Laura at Feather and Bone. Good morning, Laura.
Hi, Chilli.
Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what got you into starting Feather and Bone?
Well, I was a graphic designer working on branding projects for big companies, and my business partner Grant was trying to be a filmmaker and working in restaurants. So of course we became butchers. Like, isn't it obvious? Not. Yeah, it's an interesting story, really. My partner Grant was working as a sommelier in restaurants, and a sommelier is someone who focuses on wine. They're an expert in wine. And the central idea behind really good quality wine is this thing called terroir. It's a French term, and what it means is basically the idea, it sort of means territory. And the idea is that the wine you're consuming is a combination of all the elements that go into that place. So it's the minerals in the soil, it's the quality of the soil, it's the plants, it's the way they're grown, the genetics of the plants, and then it's the artistry of the winemaker, and there's a whole bunch of things that go into it. And so this word terroir expresses all of that. But when it came to food, Grant looked around and he couldn't see any of that concept of terroir in our food, and he thought that's really peculiar. We just have, beef, or we just have chicken, or where does all this stuff come from? Where's the terroir in our food? And that was the starting point. So he started going out and looking for the terroir in food. And he first started thinking about the breeds, so the genetics. So what breeds are animal, and why doesn't anybody talk about the breeds of meat or the breeds of lamb or the breeds of, chickens? And if you do a bit of exploring, what he realised was that there was almost no information out there, and people weren't thinking about food that way. Yeah. They not only weren't thinking about where food came from, but they also weren't thinking about how it came to be food. It was just like a packet on a shelf, and you just pick it up and you don't think about anything else. So that was really the starting point. We started exploring and trying to find farmers who were really interested in doing two things: working with land stewardship methods which promoted a regenerative approach, which is all about creating greater capacity and fertility and resilience in the landscape. Not just the soil, not just the insects, not just focusing on what it is that you're harvesting to make money as a farmer, but the entire system. And the other thing that became really clear to us was that the actual breeds of animals was really important. And that if you don't have genetic diversity, it's just the same as if you don't have genetic diversity or diversity in human communities. If everybody in the community looked like me or looked like you, we would have a very weak system, a weak community, a weak culture. We'd be very vulnerable, and it would be really boring. So animal communities and insect communities and bird communities and plant communities are all the same. You need lots and lots of diversity to create health and vitality and resilience. And we really saw that in COVID, didn't we? Like we discovered how as soon as you narrow things down and limit things, you find that everything's weaker. Systems are weaker. So Feather and Bone really started as a business that could create a marketplace for the farmers who are focusing on that kind of regenerative agriculture, connecting them with consumers who also were looking for really good quality, really healthy food from really healthy systems. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Terrific. Can you tell me, what does your store sell?
So we're butchers. That's our main discipline. That's the main thing we do. So we purchase the animal directly from the farmer. In other words, we have a direct relationship with the farmer, and we negotiate with the farmer to work out how much money they need to be able to do the land stewardship work that they do. And so we negotiate a price with them. We buy the animal from them. They send the animal to the abattoir.
Okay.
And then the abattoir send the animal to us. And so we receive whole animals. There's a bunch of things in that description that are unusual in our industry, and I can talk about those later. So basically the animals arrive to us whole, and then we break them down into the different parts, and then we sell the different parts. So we sell beef, chicken, lamb, goat, ducks, partridges, pheasants in the season, turkeys. We sell meat and poultry, basically. And we also have a kitchen. Because we're whole animal butchers, we have to use the whole animal, which is also part of respecting the life that an animal's given up to feed you. You don't want to waste anything, you want to honour that life. So I'm afraid we're in Marrickville, so there are planes going overhead.
It's okay.
So it's pretty noisy. So we also have a kitchen, and we use the kitchen to use up every single part of the animal. So we make soups and broths, and we render fats, and we make sauces and ready-to-eat meals.
The animals that you source, are they antibiotic free?
Yes. So the farm, we select to work, well, it's a combination. Farmers approach us because they like what we do, but we also approach farmers who are doing things in a way that is consistent with our principles. So when we started, we set up a series of about 12 guiding principles. And we started in 2006, so we've been going a long time. And we haven't deviated from those principles once. So we've followed those principles all the way through. They determine who we work with, and they determine how we work. So one of the guiding principles, for example, is that we work with farmers who are focusing on ecosystem health. So if you want to create a really strong, resilient ecosystem, like I was saying before, the ecosystem is comprised of the soil and all the billions of microbes and fungi and all the things that live in the soil. Then there's the insects, then there's the plants, then there's the animals. And if you want everything to be healthy and everything to work together in a sort of symbiotic relationship where there's a balance, a natural balance, if you put things like antibiotics into that system, you're perverting a natural system. Mm-hmm. And every time you inject something foreign into a natural system and you redirect that natural system or you pervert it in some way, then what you find is that there's a knock-on effect. So it's like any intervention. I mean, I don't know how many of your viewers have had babies, but if you've had a baby and you have to have a cesarean, it's an intervention in a natural system, and one intervention creates lots of others. So the farmers we work with, they don't use any antibiotics. They don't use any artificial or synthetic chemical fertilisers. They don't use any synthetic pesticides, any growth promotants at all. So the idea is that what they do is they look at their landscape, they pay really close attention to everything that's happening in that landscape, and they try to support and work with the landscape. So they use natural systems to promote fertility, so organic methods of what are they called? Just lost the word for the second. Things like fertilisers, things like organic worm teas, and all sorts of natural systems for promoting growth in the landscape. Nothing that will upset or derail natural systems. In fact, there's a really great farmer we work with, or we don't work with him, but we know him, and he said this really beautiful thing. He said, really, a good farmer's job is to get out of the way of nature, which is a really cool idea, and it's fundamentally different from the mainstream idea, which is the idea in sort of conventional, if you like, industrial farming, which is all about getting out as much as you can. Yeah. It's all extractive. It's about how do I prioritise what I need out of that landscape. So a regenerative farmer or a regenerative butcher will say, instead of saying what can I get out of that landscape, we will say, how do I work in harmony with that landscape so that everybody benefits, every creature benefits.
It's how it should be.
It's how it should be.
Yeah.
Ideally.
Yeah. Can you tell me now what the difference is between grass-fed and conventionally grown meat? So like
yes, okay.
Beef and lamb.
So it gets confusing because, so we sell, for example, what we sell is what we call pasture-raised animals, which means that all the animals that we sell, whether they're chickens or cattle, have all lived outside for the majority of their lives. Birds, for example, have to stay in a brooder for the first 3 weeks of their lives until they get feathers, because they're born with fluff. And if they're outside in exposed conditions, particularly in winter, they're very vulnerable. So they usually stay in a brooder for about 3 weeks, but then they'll go out onto pasture. And they're moved around on pasture all the time, which means your shelters have to be mobile. So you can pick up the whole thing and move it across to fresh pasture. And that's a big key to animal health. And our farmers insist on us calling it pasture raised, not just because they're in pasture, but because pasture is a better description of all the things that those animals have available to them to eat. When you talk about grass, it's kind of narrow. Yeah. So the farmers we work with will say it's not just grass, it's actually all these different things. And if you've got a herd of cattle, for example, moving through pasture, on any given day, one of them might be eating the clovers, another might be eating ryegrass, another one might be eating a native grass, another one might be eating the bark off a tree. Yeah. They self-medicate according to what their bodies tell them that they need. It's just like us. You know, you wake up in the morning and you think, I really want bacon and eggs this morning, or eggs. And then other mornings you wake up and you think, I really want fruit and yogurt, you know. So it's just your body saying, I'm looking for these particular minerals or nutrients or ingredients to make me healthy. So I want you to go and find a banana today. The next morning it's like, no, you need more protein, go and eat an egg, you know. And animals are no different. So an animal on pasture, what the farmer wants to do is to make the pasture as diverse as possible. So it's like a smorgasbord, like a banquet for the animal. And whatever they need on any given day, they can go and find. So they say pastured. In a conventional system, what happens with cattle, for example, is that cattle will stay in a paddock, and they'll generally eat whatever's in that paddock quite low before they're moved, which is really bad for the soil and not great for the animals. And then they will, depending on how they're being raised, they will often be put into a feedlot to be finished on grain. And depending on when they get put into the feedlot, the system that describes what products are, what beef products are, for example, the MLA, will allow you to call it grass-fed beef. So if it's only been in a feedlot for 30 days, you can still call it grass-fed beef, even if it's been finished on grain. So it's very misleading and very hard for consumers. Yeah. So cattle, for example, are herbivores, as we all know. They eat grass. They're very efficient. So they turn this cellulose that we can't eat, and they convert it through a complicated fermenting process in their guts into fabulous poo, which fertilises the ground and creates homes for insects and does all sorts of fabulous things. So they're actually really good mobile fertilising units if farmers use them the right way and move them across the farm. But their systems aren't designed to eat all that grain. So when they first go into a feedlot and just eat grain, they get a toxic response, which isn't great. And if you think about it, if you're eating grain-fed beef, you're consuming the residual effects of that toxic response and you're putting them into your body. It's not a nice thought. So that's a grain-fed thing, and also that's the confusion around grain-fed and grass-fed, because people will talk about grass-fed beef, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was on grass all the way through to the beginning, to the end. So you want to look for grass-fed and finished. Yes. That's an important distinction. So I think, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Probably a lot more than you asked for.
Okay, it's called Feather and Bone Providore. But what's the difference between a butcher and a Providore?
That's an excellent question, and I'm not sure I can answer that myself. It's one of those things, you know, as I said, we've been around since 2006, so we kind of started, we've called ourselves different things over the years. We've always been Feather and Bone. I think one of the reasons we don't just call, we are a butcher, absolutely, but I suppose, and we do focus on meat and poultry. That's our core offering and our core discipline. I suppose we call ourselves a Providore because we also sell other things, and the other things that we source, we use the same set of principles to source those things as we do the meat and poultry. So I suppose we're interested in the idea that whether it's meat, whether it's poultry, whether it's wine, whether it's oil, whether it's dairy products, whether it's shoes, whatever it is that you as a consumer are consuming, you want to know where it came from, how it was made, how it got to you. Was the person who produced it paid fairly? Are you paying a fair price for it? Like, I think as consumers we need to take responsibility for the choices we make. It's really easy for us to be infantilised by the system, because it works for the system to make it quite obscure and quite hard for us to know where stuff comes from, because then we don't know, so we don't question, and people can take shortcuts and they can overcharge and do all sorts of things. And as consumers, it's quite hard to insist on knowing where things come from, to ask for transparency. And so I suppose the idea of Providore is a little bit more encompassing than just butcher. So we work with a couple of amazing honey producers, for example, just the most beautiful practice and incredible quality honey. And they basically operate according to the same principles. And we don't call ourselves a supermarket. So Providore just sort of, maybe it's a little bit wanky, I don't know, but a bit more of a romantic way to say that we don't just do meat. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. You've kind of brushed on it, but what kind of farmers do you support?
Yeah, so we have a very clear set of guidelines, again, as I said, that we follow, and those include the kinds of farming practices that we choose to support. I think if you could boil it down, our business really exists to provide a marketplace for the farmers we see doing amazing stuff on the land. And as I said before, to connect them with consumers who are also looking to understand more about where their food comes from, and who want to spend their money supporting systems that are productive and regenerative rather than destructive and extractive. So the farmers we work with, there's a couple of sort of guidelines. We will only work with farmers who raise livestock outside on pasture, so no sheds, no feedlots. In order to do that effectively, on the whole, what has to happen is that the shelter structures have to be mobile, because you want to be able to move those animals to fresh locations constantly, because that's good for their health. And it's also better for the landscape, because the landscape, if you have a whole lot of pigs or chickens in a paddock, within a very short period of time, they've destroyed the joint, So you need to be moving them as often as you can to give the ground time to recover, because you're also thinking about the soil and the landscape as one of the participants in the ecosystem. So you have to give it a fair chance to recover as well. So we're working with farmers who only raise pasture, who only run pasture-based systems. We're working with farmers who practice natural systems for land management. So that's, as we said before, things like natural fertility programs, and not fertility, fertilising. Yeah. So no synthetic fertilisers or growth promotants or pesticides or anything like that. Farmers who are basically not using props to create capacity, they're working with nature to create capacity. We try to be as local as we possibly can, because we're interested in a short supply chain, really, really short supply chain. Basically farmer, abattoir, us. Yeah. The shorter it can be, the more transparent it is, the more control everybody has over the quality, the easier it is for the customer to have a clear line of sight back to the farm, and the closer the relationship we can have with the farmer. So we try to work just in New South Wales. We do have other farms in other parts of Australia, but mostly in New South Wales. What else? We're really interested, as I said before, in genetic diversity. So we're looking for farmers who are growing diverse breeds. So a farmer who has a relationship with their landscape, whereby they are focusing on what it is that they can do to work in in a harmonious relationship with that landscape. So they're choosing a breed which will survive and thrive in that landscape. They're choosing to manage those animals on that landscape in a way which doesn't compromise the health and well-being of the landscape. They're replanting, revegetating, restoring balance, basically. Those are the key principles, really. Yeah, and they're pretty amazing, I've got to say. The farmers we work with, we are so lucky. Over the last 18 years, we have worked with some of the most extraordinary people and learnt so much from them, because these people are choosing to farm in a way that is outside the mainstream. They're mavericks, you know, they're heroes. And to do that, you know, to buck the system, takes a heap of courage, and it's harder. And especially when we first started, you know, there weren't a lot of people doing it. And so often these people would be isolated in their communities, people wouldn't understand what they were doing, they'd be suspicious. And yeah, I'm so full of respect and admiration for them. And now it's really cool because there are heaps of young people coming into farming, which is just brilliant. And people like you who are interested. So it's just like, yeah, it feels like we're turning a corner. It's very cool.
So this is kind of a left-wing question. What do you do when people only want lamb cutlets and you're like left with other parts of the animal?
It's such a good question. It's such a good question. So this speaks to what we do, which is that we're a whole animal butcher. So what most butchers will do is they will work with a wholesaler, and they'll say to the wholesaler, you know, they know what their customers want, because their customers come in and say, I want lamb cutlets. Or they come in and they say, I want lamb mince, whatever it is. So the butcher says, I need to answer the demands of my customer. I'm here to serve my customer, so I need to supply my customer with what they're asking for. So the butcher says to the wholesaler, I need, you know, 3 boxes of lamb cutlets, or 3 boxes of the section from the animal, which is where you get the lamb cutlets from. Now, the only way you can do that, so what happens is the wholesaler then goes back to the abattoir, and what they do is they buy sections of the animal from the abattoir. So the more steps you have like that, the less transparency and the less line of sight you have back to the farm. So in that system, the farmer grows a whole bunch of lambs. They send the lambs to the abattoir, and that's the last they see or hear of them. The abattoir kills the lambs, breaks them down into the parts that the wholesaler is saying that the butchers want. Then they put them all into boxes, a whole bunch of different lambs from different places, all in a box, that section, and then they sell to the wholesaler those boxes of, you know, the sections that make the lamb cutlets, and then the wholesaler goes and sends those boxes that make the lamb cutlets out to the butcher. So the butcher has no idea which farm they come from. They've never had a conversation with a farmer. They don't know, half the time they don't even know where the farm is. They might know where the abattoir is, but they don't, that's all they'll know. Cowra lamb or Junie lamb, for example, but that doesn't tell you the farm. It doesn't tell you the practice. It doesn't tell you the breed. It doesn't tell you the relationship the farmer has with the land. So by contrast, what we do is we work directly with a farmer. So we have personal, direct relationships with the farmers. We're in constant contact with them. They're reporting to us on the conditions and of the landscape and how that's affecting the livestock. We order our lambs from the farmer. The lambs, we're talking lambs because you said cutlets.
Yeah.
So the lambs that we have ordered particularly all go together to the abattoir. It's very, very careful transportation, very, very careful animal husbandry in that process of transportation to make sure that the stress levels are as low as possible and the animals are calm. Because the animals are handled quite a lot, they're usually quite calm with people because they're moved a lot in this system of farming that we work with. So the animals get to the abattoir. The farmer is working with the abattoir to make sure that the animals don't sit outside the abattoir in really stressful conditions for days on end, trying to make sure that that transportation process is as short as it can be. The animals are killed, and then those animals come back to us. So we receive a whole animal. Yeah. Now, if we have a customer who comes in and says, I just want lamb cutlets. So take the seasonal thing, for example. In summer, everybody wants grilling and barbecue cuts, steaks, cutlets, things like that. They don't want lamb shanks. They don't want beef brisket necessarily, unless they're going to smoke it. So you've got this imbalance. And then in winter, everybody wants lamb shanks and you're wishing that lambs had 8 legs instead of 4 legs, which is where the shanks come from, and they don't want the lamb cutlets, so you've got all these lamb cutlets. So we spend a lot of time working with our customers, educating them about this and explaining, if you want to support farmers who are working in this way and doing this really amazing work on our collective behalf, because those farms are the lungs of the country. Those farms are capturing the carbon, sequestering the carbon, storing the water, mitigating against the impacts of climate change. If we all want to support those farmers, then you have to understand that there's a whole animal involved here. And if you want to support the farmers who respect the lives of the animals they're caring for, then we need to do our bit as consumers. We need to respect that life as well. So we have to extend ourselves. We have to think, okay, well, I might have some lamb cutlets sometimes, but if I'm going to have a lamb cutlet, then I also need to have a lamb shoulder another time, or I need to have some lamb mince another time. And I have to be open to the idea that I'm not just going to have lamb cutlets and chicken breast and steak. I have to open myself up, and I have to, in the same way that the farmers open themselves up and learn and embrace different ways of doing things, we as consumers need to do the same thing. We need to learn to eat differently.
Definitely.
But it's a cycle. So if the customer goes into the butcher and says, I only want lamb cutlets, the butcher's just trying to make a living. And the smart way to make a living is you just buy what you know the customer needs, because then there's no waste. The less smart way to do it is to do what we do, which is to buy the whole animal. And then you've got a problem, because sometimes people want it, sometimes people don't. You have to work super hard to encourage people to try new things and do new things. But that's also why we have a kitchen.
Yes.
So our kitchen can take anything that's left over and we'll turn it into something gorgeous, some beautiful lamb curry, or, a soup or a broth or whatever. So that's how we deal with it. But I often talk about the need for the consumer to take more responsibility. We as consumers need to understand that we are just as important a part of the cycle. There's a farmer, there's a butcher, and there's the end result, the customer. We all play a role, and if we don't play our role, then the system doesn't work properly. And we end up with the broken food system that we have now, where nobody knows where anything comes from. The supermarkets are ripping people off and ripping farmers off, and the landscapes are all being destroyed. Climate change is exploding. We need a different system.
Mm.
That's probably a bit too political. I went off on a tangent there.
It's all right. So, as you said, you buy the whole animal.
Yep.
What do you do with do you get parts like the lung or the stomach or heart?
So, when we buy the whole animal, we're constantly saying to the abattoir, we want the whole animal, all the bits.
Yes.
Because that's part of the whole animal.
Yep.
And we have more and more customers who understand the benefits of eating offal and organ meats. There's organ meats are like super nutrient, super nutritious. And if you've come from a system, as we said before, where you're eating chicken breast and steak and lamb cutlets, you probably, no one's been cooking you liver or kidney or heart. You don't really know much about it. It's a bit scary and weird and awful. So, but we have lots of customers, more and more customers, who've either come from cultures in different parts of the world where they embrace eating organ meats, they understand the value and the benefit of eating organ meats, or people are starting to understand that organ meats are really fantastic things to eat and they're really good for you and really healthy, and they fit into that whole animal perspective. So we ask the abattoirs to give us everything. We almost always get the kidneys and the hearts and the tongues and the livers. It's very hard for us to get anything else. The abattoirs tend to take them, there are 2 reasons why, because we insist on getting the organs specifically from the animals, from the farmers. So as I said before, at most abattoirs and with most meat that is available commercially, basically the farmers send their animals into the abattoir and they're kind of, it's like it goes into a big bucket.
Yeah.
All the lamb goes into a big bucket. It might be from farms from a region, but the way one farmer farms and the way another farmer farms, all of that disappears because it all goes into a bucket. Mm-hmm. It's the lamb bucket. So if you think about it, all the offal that comes out of that, all the hearts and lungs and kidneys, they're all just put in a big bucket. You don't know where they come from. So for us, it's really important that we're getting the organs from the animals that we specifically have bought from the farm, because we know that those animals are raised in the healthiest, best way, which means that the organ meats that come from those animals are going to be the healthiest and the best quality. And if you think about it, things like kidneys and livers, they perform a filtering job in your body or my body or a pig's body or any animal's body. And if they're filtering out all those toxins, you want all the inputs into that animal to be pretty good in the first place.
Yes.
Otherwise, you think that organ might be a bit compromised. It might not be very good quality or very healthy. So if we ask the abattoir to give us the organs specifically from the animals that we're buying, it's more work for them to separate out our animals and our organs and things. They don't like doing that. That's hard. The system is designed for scale and speed and volume, you know. So yes, we definitely get all those things, and we're really proud to get those things, and we spend a lot of time encouraging customers to buy them. A lot of customers can't quite do it, but they know it's good. So we do a thing called, we do beef mince with organs. So we put 20% of the organs into beef mince. It's super delicious, and you would never know.
Yeah.
So people feed their kids that, knowing that they're giving their kids really good food, but their kids aren't freaking out.
That's a good idea.
It's a good idea.
I saw on your website that you sold milk too, Jimmy's milk.
Yeah.
Would you be brave enough to sell raw milk for, like, people do pet consumption or cosmetic use?
Bath milk.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't have any. Yeah, look, it wouldn't be a question of whether we'd be brave enough. We work with two, as I said before, and that comes back to that Providore question. We work with a small group of other producers who follow the same kinds of principles as us. We don't work with a lot of different people because we're not a supermarket, and we're really specific about kind of, I guess, who we work with and whose product fits with ours. So the two dairies we work with, they practice the most. I don't know how, I'm not an expert on dairy, so I might not get the language right, but basically the interventions that they use to render the product safe for human consumption, they are as minimal as they possibly can be. Okay. So they pasteurize very, very slowly at a very low temperature. So when you buy milk from the supermarket or milk from the conventional system, it's crash pasteurized, which means that it's heated at a really, really high temperature very fast, which destroys heaps of stuff in the milk. All of those wonderful, microbes and things, organisms and things that live in milk that make it so extraordinarily healthy and delicious, they're all zapped when you put it through a system like that. So these guys, the people we work with, do a very different system. And the quality of animal husbandry means that the animals are in peak condition. They're really healthy, beautiful animals. So the milk that they're producing is incredibly nutritious and healthy and delicious. So even with pasteurizing, you're still going to get a superior product. As far as the raw stuff, I mean, no one's approached us to do that. I wouldn't necessarily welcome yet another challenge, I suppose, but I'm not averse to it, you know. I mean, I don't know if you saw, but Pasture Dairy, who are up in the not in the Blue Mountains, in the Southern Highlands, they're a sheep farm, and they make absolutely delicious cheese. And they have a raw sheep's milk cheese that just won Top of the Pops at the Royal Easter Show.
Wow.
So they won the top gong in the cheese. So I think the idea of raw products are slowly starting to get a little bit more traction.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, that's right.
Apparently, around 70% of meat sold in stores is gassed. It's with carbon monoxide to keep it that red colour. What do you think about that?
Look, there are a whole lot of reasons why most of the food that we consume these days has a lot of preservatives in it, one way or another, whether it's the packaging systems that people use or whether it's the ingredients that are in the products. Our system, the current sort of the dominant food system, in our country and in lots of the Western world, in lots of countries actually, not just in the Western world, is sort of focused and organised around the idea of speed and scale. So you want to produce something as quickly as possible, and you want to produce as much of it as you can, and you want to get it to market as quickly as possible, and then you want to sell it as quickly as possible and start again, you know, and that's on repeat. That's not how natural systems work. Natural systems, if you leave nature to do its thing, it has its own rhythm and logic. There are pauses where nothing happens for a long time. You know, there's stasis. So chickens don't lay eggs in the middle of winter. You know, things go into dormancy. So there are natural rhythms and natural pauses, and there's no waste in nature, because something will always eat something else. You know, whatever it is at any level in the no matter how small, no matter how big. So there's no waste. There are natural pauses. There are natural systems and a natural rhythm. When we prioritise this idea of speed and scale, we subvert that natural system. And every time you do that, there's a price to pay. So if you're going to pick apples, for example, really, you know, if you know that you want to ship your apples across the world, or you want them to be on the shelves in a far-flung location, and you want them to be ripe by a certain point, then you know that, and you know it's going to take you 2 months for them to get there, then you need to pick them. You need to pick them unripe. And if you're picking them unripe, then the natural system, the plant hasn't had time to actually produce all of the goodness that apple should contain. It's like something that's been abbreviated before it can reach its prime. So first of all, as a product, you're not getting all the nutrition and all the health values that you could get from that beautiful apple or piece of meat. And then it's being held in sort of suspended animation for a long time, and then it's gassed to ripen. All of these things produce what might look like a nice healthy piece of fruit or meat on the shelf, but the essential qualities and the essential value in that product is deeply compromised. So if you want meat to sit on the shelf, you don't know how many people are going to come into your shop, and you want to get that meat, you want it to sit on your shelf, you want to be able to sell it. You need to make it look as good as it can for as long as possible, and you need it to have as long shelf life as possible. So you have to employ things like gassing. We just don't do any of that stuff. We say we don't use any preservatives, we don't use any fillers. Our sausages are completely natural. They just contain meat and spices and herbs.
Terrific.
No fillers, nothing. They don't last on the shelf as long, and they do oxidise. And they do have to be frozen quite quickly if you're not going to eat them fresh. But you're not getting any compromises. You're getting something at the peak of its potential. It's being harvested when it's at its best, and you're eating it fresh, and it's the best quality, and it's the best for your body. So it's a big conversation. We have these really complex supply chains in our food system. That means that, you know, from where something is produced through to the eventual place where someone's going to buy it, it might go through, you know, dozens of hands. And each time you do that, you've got to try and invent a way to make the product still look good and still taste good and still, you know, be attractive to the consumer. And every time you intervene, there's a price to pay, and that price is nutrition, health, value, and generally a fair price to the farmer.
Yeah. So you mentioned packaging. What do you use as packaging, and what's the best?
So it's tricky. I'm not happy with where we are, but we do the best we can, because there are several things about our business that I find challenging. One of the first ones is the refrigeration. We have to refrigerate. We have solar panels on the roof, and we have a smart refrigeration system which is intelligent, so it doesn't put energy in if the rooms don't need them. But we use a lot of energy in refrigeration, and that, you know, I wish we had a better system for doing that. It's difficult. And packaging is the other one, and water is hard too. So we have a solar hot water system, but we use a lot of water, and we're in an industrial estate. We can't have a tank I would love to have tanks to capture. Imagine how much water you could get off the roofs of all of these units here. You get so much water, but the systems don't allow us to have a tank here. And the third thing is packaging. So it's really, really hard not to use plastic. So one of the things, I was talking before about whole animal versus buying sections of the animal. So if an abattoir breaks an animal down, they chill it, and then so they kill it, they chill it, they gut it, and then they break it down into the parts. They pack it in plastic and they put it in a box. So when a butcher receives it, they receive a lot of plastic and a lot of box. When our animals come, they literally come as an animal. There's no plastic, there's nothing. They just come as an animal, and you saw them downstairs, and then they hang in our cool room. So we feel good about that because there's no plastic involved in that process, much less than there would be in a normal butcher. But then when it comes to us breaking down the animals and storing them, when we sell fresh meat out of the butchery, we wrap it in a special paper that has no... that is a vegetable paper. It's a really thick vegetable paper designed for things like meat. So it's got no plastic in it. So it's completely compostable, biodegradable. So we feel good about that. It's very expensive, but we feel good about that. A lot of the deli paper that you get has a plastic membrane on it. Yeah. But that's just as bad as plastic. It looks like paper, but it's plastic, So we don't do that. And we do use, there is a compostable plastic that you can use when you vacuum seal meat, so we do try to use that, but it's not as strong as conventional plastic, so we end up using quite a lot of plastic when we pack our meat. And I wish it wasn't the case, but it is the case. We do the best we can to keep it to a minimum. Our boxes, you can see behind us, we have recycled cardboard boxes for our deliveries, and inside we have recycled wool liners. So it's wool, it's excess cast off waste wool from the wool industry, and it's cleaned and manufactured and made into these strips, and then we use those to wrap. So that's an insulation material. Wow. So there is a tiny bit of biodegradable plastic in that, but only a tiny bit. So that's better than, styrofoam boxes and more plastic. So definitely. We do the best we can, but it's hard.
So this is the section I call you have to be brave to answer these questions.
Yep.
Have you ever felt pressured to sell vegan patties?
No, and I would never do it. Do you know why? Now you got me started. Because I have no problem with vegans. I have no problem with anyone choosing to eat food that is right for their body. I think that one of the really important things that we've lost sight of in our sort of modern food system is the ability to listen to our bodies and feed ourselves what our bodies tell us we need. We were talking before about how the cattle out in the paddock, on any given day they'll eat one thing, on another day they might eat something else. They don't eat a flat diet, which is partly why feedlots are so problematic, because basically animal nutritionists work out what is the optimum diet for an average cow, and they say we're just going to give all of the cows that diet. So you put animals in a shed or in a feedlot and they're all given the same diet. But what we know is that we don't all eat the same. We don't all want the same, and we don't all want the same every day. So a single diet just doesn't suit everybody. So I think if vegans want to eat according to their philosophy and their approach and it works for their body, go for it. What I don't approve of is processed food. So a vegan patty, inevitably, if I make a patty here, I will make it from beef or lamb, I'll make it from mince. All it will have in it will be mince and salt and pepper. And it's the best quality mince. It's fabulous, and it's not very much. It's a couple of 100 grams of mince or less. A vegan patty will contain, probably more than 10 ingredients in order to become a facsimile of meat. I just don't see why you do that to your body. It can't be healthy, and it's also energy intense. There are so many processes involved in that. It's expensive. It doesn't make sense to me. Eat more vegetables. Do something interesting. But I don't agree with processed food.
Yes, neither do I. A lot of people watching will want to know, where can they buy from you? So I made the mistake of going to your other shops.
Yeah.
This one's Marrickville.
This is Marrickville.
And then you have a Waverley shop.
That's correct.
But
yes, we do.
Am I correct in saying you also you sell online?
We do sell online, so you can buy online, you can order online, and we deliver, just like a normal online shop. You can come into either of the two shops. We also sell to a couple of other shops. There's a shop called Taste Organic, which has a couple of different sites, and they buy some of our meat and some of our products. Yeah, but we deliver all over. You can order and get your delivery the next day all over Sydney. We don't deliver outside Sydney. I mean, we deliver to that's not true. We deliver to the Central Coast, to the Blue Mountains, and to the South Coast, but not any further at this point. We're a local business. We want to stay local, and we're really interested in supporting local communities, which is why the farmers we work with, most of them will either sell locally and to us, and we really encourage that, because if you've ever spent any time in the country, it's actually really hard to get good quality food in the country, which is completely nonsensical, because that's where the food's coming from. Yeah. But of course it all gets transferred into the city to big distribution centres and then back out to the local Woolworths or whatever it is. So we think that the more that communities can grow food and eat food locally produced, the better. That's got to be the solution.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Laura,
That's
for
a
spending
pleasure.
the time answering these questions. I've learnt a lot, and I'm definitely sure people watching have learnt a lot. And yeah, thank you.
And there's the book too.
Oh, yes.
So the book, if people can't get to us, don't want to come to us, don't eat meat, whatever, this is a book which basically tells a lot of stories about how to eat meat in a way that is ethical, So you might never come to us, but there's a whole bunch of information in this book which will help you to know what questions to ask your butcher or your grocer, really. It's really a guide for people who want to connect more and take more responsibility and ownership of the decisions they make around food. So, I don't know, that's my little spree.
Awesome.